I just finished watching this new 3-hour-long interview with Naval Ravikant 2 times.
Everyone I know who is successful in life has a strong independent streak, no exceptions.
More about that later, and to save you time, I've cut out 24 clips with 10 truths on parenting, leadership, and success. I'm Jordan, I've made over $5 million, hired 50 people, and here is the first insight.
Using creativity to find answers to problems and to not using coercion.
Use creativity instead of coercion to solve problems with your children, but also colleagues or employees. Here's how Naval does it with his children.
With my older son, I actually managed to explain to him the germ theory of disease. We watched YouTube videos on little germs eating things, and I convinced him like germs are going to eat his teeth if he doesn't brush them, so he brushes them. My daughter, she's really young, she just sees me flossing all the time. She loves playing with floss. It's that simple. So each one has their own mechanism how to figure it out. My middle son, he likes the, I think it's a Spider-Man toothbrush. So there's like a very particular toothbrush he likes, so he plays with that. So there's a different solution for each one. But it takes time, it takes creativity, it takes problem solving, and you can't get exactly what you want when you want it.
It takes time and mental energy. That's why many managers and most parents use the following, most often subconsciously.
We have this distinction that kids below a certain age, they're like somewhere between, this is going to be controversial, but somewhere between animals and slaves and ignoramuses, right? They're like animals that you need to teach them basic things so it sticks. Like you teach a dog, you teach the kid what to eat, when to eat, how to eat, when to go to the bathroom. And then they're a little bit of a slave because we can order them around. We're physically larger than them, even if we're not physically overpowering them. Every missive is backed up with a threat of, or what else? Well, I'll take it away from you. Right? It's like with the government. The government says, I'm gonna write you a ticket for jaywalking. What they really mean is I'll put you in jail if you jaywalk, because everything is backed up at the end of the day with the ability to throw you in jail. The same way, everything you say as a parent is backed up with the ability of force.
There are no bad kids, only bad parents. So when you're kids, stop asking why. I think you may have taught them the wrong lesson. Don't real leaders, true parents, create giants who stand on their shoulders instead of dwarfs who kneel with their feet? Well, listen closely, because here's how Naval uses force on his kids.
The two places where I probably interfere a lot is one is I insist on math and reading. Like you got to do your math and you got to do your reading. If you do your math and reading, then you're a free individual. Until then, you're a little slave and you don't get to do what you want.
Well, he does this for a very specific reason. Listen closely.
I think brain plasticity is a thing, right?
Yeah.
Like if you don't learn your math or your music or your languages when you're young, it's a lot harder to learn them when you're older. And they're building blocks. So, my kid may be interested in some physics thing, like, why is the sunlight going this way? Or why is there a quarter moon instead of a half moon? And start trying to explain it. But if he doesn't have the basics in geometry or math because he skipped all of that, then he'll lose interest before I can get him interested enough to figure out the math. If you're trying to figure out basic math when you're 19, it's pretty late in the game. Like you're gonna have a hard time. Same thing with literacy and reading. If you never learn how to put words together and read, then when you finally are interested and I point you to the book, you can't read it. And you're not gonna climb that hill from zero to figure it out.
So people lose interest in learning the advanced, the deeper stuff when they don't understand the basics. Sounds true to me. So you may force them on the basics while you can on the few things that you think are important. Just understand that the more coercive you are, the more your children try to do this.
I have noticed that all of their peers tend to have a way of getting attention from adults and violating the rules. And that could be anything from I'm having an allergic reaction to I threw up to I'm having a meltdown to whatever. And these are all attention-seeking behavior to control adults who are normally not controllable. And our kids seem to have a lot less of that.
The more uncontrollable you appear to children and people, the more they try to find ways to get some control back. But here is an even more important insight on setting rules.
The problem with coercion is that it blocks knowledge growth. And your duty as a parent is to facilitate and foster knowledge growth.
The more you use force or threats as a parent or leader, the more you block independent thinking. Here's why.
Deep down, we all kind of know that there's this contradiction between, okay, we teach kids, go to school, obey the rules, do what we say, you don't know yet, you're not ready, you're not ready, you're not ready. And then all of a sudden they go to college and there's a complete flip. Like, now you're free, now you get to learn how to operate in the real world, you got to think for yourself. Why can't you think for yourself, right? And this whole time you've domesticated them as almost like animals so that they can function in normal society. You train them to eat, you train them to go to the bathroom, you train them to go to sleep, you train them to listen to the teacher. And then all of a sudden they're supposed to be independent thinkers and creators and knowledge generators.
Like what Naval tweeted 1 month ago, rules trade creativity for predictability. And the cost of obedience is creativity. I mean, isn't every good kid the greatest artist that we will never know? And when you don't teach them to think independently, but also consider this.
If eating well is really important, then it's really important that eating is not confused by what your parents' expectations are.
Yes, your kids will face enough change in life. Why be their first jailer? But there is nuance. At the same time, my parents never taught me or forced me to eat fish. And now I don't like to eat fish. And like Naval said, it's much harder to teach this yourself later in life. So I think the following is closer to what to avoid.
You don't want them to avoid chocolate because they're afraid of dad.
I agree, but avoiding fear is hard if you're still having some areas where you still use force, your authority as a parent or leader, like having your kids to eat healthy or to read, to this and that, which raises the following question.
And I think even as an adult, we're all still dealing with social media addiction. We're all still dealing with eating more sugar than we want to. We're all still dealing with trying to figure out the proper diet. We're all still trying to be disciplined enough to exercise. We're all still, trying not to doom scroll all the time. So there's a learning process. And so the question is, when do you start that learning process?
As early as possible?
The sooner you can teach your kids that knowledge, the better. But there's an age. I would argue with Aaron, like there's a certain age at which it just doesn't register.
I don't think there's a clear answer, but instead that it is about understanding and realizing the following.
I would rather that my kids be disobedient and free and uneducated than that they're educated and obedient, right?
Disobedient, free, and uneducated, over-educated but obedient. Isn't the best gift you can give your kids the courage to disappoint you? After all, expectations are the of their dreams. So why not teach your child to assassinate yours?
Because you can always educate yourself, and most of us who know anything have become self-learners over time. And learning is always moving target, but that independent thinking, that independent streak, you can't get back. Everyone I know who is successful in life has a strong independent streak, no exceptions.
No exception. So the fifth truth is that by wanting to raise independent thinkers, you are more likely to raise children who are strong self-learners. Reminds me of this quote from Naval: if you want to make the wrong decision, ask everyone. And if you want your children to be successful, independent thinking sounds almost like a requirement according to Naval's experience, which is why he said this.
I think all of us have a story of how some very important parts of our life are all about undoing all the things we were taught and discovering for ourselves.
Ridding yourself of untruth. So true. And one of the most effective ways how I do this is by speaking my thoughts out loud to my Voice Mama app on my phone when I walk outside. For instance, when I feel stressed after something happened in my business. And when I hear myself saying things that don't seem to be true, I'm basically shedding myself of untruth. In fact, I'm not the only one.
One of the ways that I learned what I think is by saying it.
By saying things. Like I did roughly 2 weeks ago when I was walking outside for about an hour or so and keep talking about this problem until I found out the exact reason why I felt angry. And when I did, when I heard myself saying the exact thing of why I felt this anger inside of me, it faded away. Which is just why I keep doing this. It's an effective way for me to get rid of stress, anger, whatever it is, and to find the truth. And if you want to know more truths that I found in my life, well, I write about them in my weekly 2-minute email that you receive if you download this free Google Sheet below with over 80 free tools that I use in my business and personal life. All unsponsored, unaffiliated, without sales stuff, just truth.
What matters is truth, not who says what or where you lived or what book you read. What just matters is what's true. And that you can figure out for yourself.
Now here's what Naval means with unlearning and why it may even be more important than learning new things.
And it could be learning how to learn instead of being forced to learn, learning what to learn instead of the set of subjects we were given in school. It could be finally figuring out proper diet and nutrition, which turns out to be the opposite of what we were taught. The FDA pyramid is still food pyramid is still upside down. It starts with grains and, get your bread and get your rice, and then it kind of goes down from there, and meat is at the bottom. So a lot of it is about undoing what we learned.
Unlearning false beliefs may be more important than learning new things. But also think about the following.
Once a problem gets solved to the kid's own understanding, it's solved for the rest of their life.
It's also now part of an explanatory framework that you can build upon.
Yes.
Rules don't connect to each other. The only way rules connect to each other is dad or mom say so. Whereas knowledge, it's a framework of understanding. So once you understand you're brushing your teeth because of germs, then you also understand why you should shower and why you should use soap and why you should change your underwear and all those things.
Rules don't connect to each other. So when you teach humans to understand and verify things for themselves, it becomes part of their knowledge framework. And more so, as a parent, aren't you applying leverage? Teaching them how to think for themselves? Doesn't that compound faster than teaching them what to think? But there is a problem to this.
People say, well, I don't want to be my kid's best friend. They have friends. I have to be a parent. And then they kind of think through, well, what does that mean to be a parent? And the reality is, I think most people would have preferred more independence when they were kids. So why not start trying to give it to your kids and doing the explanation? But the explanations are hard. I mean, it takes a lot of upfront work.
The price of raising free thinkers is your own temporary discomfort. But the most dangerous household is where thinking is outsourced to the parents. So I think a big question is, how strong is your desire to raise independent truth seekers? Because if this desire is strong enough, big enough, then in the heat of the moment, you are likely to decide that short-term sacrifice for the long-term gains. A personal example, for me, it takes a lot more time and energy to make sure that my employees understand how to think instead of me just telling them what to do. Anyways, consider the following too.
I'm not very authoritarian with the kids. I never have been. So if they're around me and they want to eat junk food, I just hand them the junk food and then I'll leave the room. So I'm not that responsible. Now,
that's mom's problem.
Yeah, exactly. So mom and other caretakers might be more restrictive, but I tend not to be, especially around food, especially when I know what a bad job I personally do with food.
Yeah, so avoid being a hypocrite because people follow what you do more than what you say.
I say get there first and then show them the way.
And if you're unsure if this whole approach to leading parenting will work, well, Naval went first and shared this.
Where can you start, right? So for example, I'll say with my children are closer to somewhere between homeschooled and unschooled. And they wake up when they want and they sleep relatively when they want. And they do have a lot more permissiveness around eating and screen time. The amount of screen time they spend is horrific. I think one of my kids was showing me the other day, he did 8 hours of screen time that day, right? Which I think most parents would have a fit. And like one day, 8 hours screen time, that's all he did. So they already have a high level of permissiveness. And I can just say for me personally that they seem pretty well developed. They're happy, they're healthy, they're pretty intelligent, and they seem to do well relative to their peers. They seem to have less hang-ups than I think the average kid would.
So my question, would you rather raise a child who's easy to control or impossible to manipulate? But if Naval's experience isn't enough proof, then consider this about truth.
The beauty of truth is you don't have to rely on somebody's study because, you know, people who do studies these days, we know how corrupted they are, right? So we know there's a whole class of people who show up on Twitter and say, source, you know, as if that's killing your argument. Like, Harvard didn't bless this. Well, Harvard wants mandatory education at Harvard, right? So I can't listen to them. They want to indoctrinate my child.
Yeah, truth doesn't need to be blessed by Harvard. In fact, most sources, like Harvard, are biased and further from the truth. It reminds me of the following quote. A man who wants to lead the orchestra must turn his back on the crowd, but also avoid the following trap.
I think you have to remove the person from the theories.
Remove the person from the theories. Don't assume that what I or Naval says next will also be true just because we have spoken truths in the past. For instance, I think there is a bigger truth to be found from this video, which is this. As long as you have a need as a parent for your children to succeed, then won't you feel the negative emotions when things don't go as planned? So I think the parent who is no longer a parent, instead a person who has freed himself from needing anything to happen, can experience peace with what is. So think about this.
First of all, I don't think of myself. I just want to be clear on that. And that's not a rule, it's just a habit I've kind of developed. Because I found that thinking about yourself is a source of all unhappiness.
Really? Me is a disease. Naval shares 12 insights on true peace in this video. See you there.